Good morning, everybody. It is so good to be together this morning. I know, let's give a round of applause. I know we're hot and sweaty, but man, it is good to be able to check in with one another face to face. And before we get too far, I know many of you came in after the initial announcement, but we want you to know bathrooms are available over here in the ministry building. And Bobby was thoughtful enough to put lights in there. There are lanterns, so you don't have to fly blind while you're in there. That's good. That's available to you. Derek's right. A lot of what we want to do today is sing together, because there's something about singing together that gets you through something like we've been through this last week. And so I don't know if you've been like me, but I've had some songs stuck in my head this past week. The first one was Rock You Like a Hurricane by the Scorpions, which isn't the greatest song, especially when you go back and read the lyrics, but that was stuck in my head. I couldn't help it. The other one was Eye of the Storm. Anyone remember that 90s praise song? That was stuck in my head. But the one I found myself singing the most is Thank You, Lord. That's what I was singing when I was sitting there at those lights for 30 minutes on Kirkendall. And all the other things, that was rolling through my head because I'd heard so many stories from this past week of how you are caring for one another. And so as I'm thinking about what is the word for us today, I had to go to 1 Thessalonians. There is one verse there that I think perfectly captures what we've experienced together and who I think Bamel has shown up for each other in life. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 9. Now, about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you. For you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. Do you hear what he's saying? He had a long list of things they needed to learn about. They had questions they had asked. But he said, one thing you don't need to learn any more about is how to love one another well. You've got that covered, and you learn to do that by God's love for you. You've been good students of God's love that has been poured out over you through Jesus Christ. And because of that, because you've been good students of that love, you have learned how to love one another well too. And it's revealing, I think, in moments like this. Crisis reveals character. A lot of times we can keep it covered up, but when crisis strikes, who we really are comes out. And some things that are revealed aren't very pretty. For example, I learned that I'm willing to wait in an hour-long line at Long John Silver's. It's not pretty. I'm not proud of that. But there are so many other ways that I think we've been revealed with such good character here at Bamel. I am so thankful for the work that Donna Stephen and Michael Montalvo and Pam Huntsman have done. This is before we even knew about this hurricane coming, but they jumped on it and started compiling a list, creating a spreadsheet of everybody in Bamel as best we could, so that we would be able to check on people when something like this happened. And because of that, I know there are so many stories that we've been able to gather as people have checked on one another. I am so thankful for the volunteers that are a part of that team, that you've been faithful in calling and checking on folks and getting information and relaying information back. That is such valuable, valuable work, and I love that we were ready to do that. Because as I'm hearing these stories, there are just so many beautiful things that have happened this past week. You've hosted people in your homes. You've called and texted to check on one another. You've gotten to know your neighbors in new ways. You've shared food and water and gasoline and power and AC. You fixed fences. You cared for other people's pets. You shared important information like, hey, this HEB is open and they've got charging stations, or hey, this Whataburger is open. That's important information to share too. You helped friends clean up debris. You delivered gift cards. You helped people figure out how to get the help they needed, because some of you have been through a storm like this before. You've had a tree fall on you, you've had flooding, and you know what those next steps are. And so for someone who's overwhelmed in the midst of it all, you can come alongside them and say, okay, here's the next thing you got to do. You've encouraged those who are still waiting for power to return. There's so much good that you have done. And here's the other thing, the flip side of that is for those of you who have been in need, those who are still without power, those of you who've had houses damaged, you let us love you. And that's just as important, because that may be harder to allow people to step in and take care of you. And so I'm so glad that that willingness is here, because that opens the door to share that Christ-like love with one another. And so thank you. Even if you were the one receiving the help, you have done a beautiful thing for this church. And it's one of the things that's a hidden blessing in moments like this, is that a crisis has the power to kind of get us over our default individualism that we live in so often. I was amazed as I was driving around just our neighborhood, how many people were outside talking to their neighbors, because Netflix wasn't working. And so we got to have something else to do. And so many cars, after our neighborhood got power, there were so many cars parked in our neighborhood along the roads. Why? Because all of these folks in our neighborhood were hosting friends and family who hadn't gotten power back yet. Just a beautiful picture of the way a crisis can get us out of just our typical mold and start to help us connect with one another. Now, I know we don't want to live like this all the time, but there are memories created now in moments like this that we can hold on to and remember the blessings of, so that we can live differently on the other side of this. Because we're not meant to live alone. That's part of what a crisis like this reveals. We need one another. And so it's been beautiful to see you show up for one another. I was listening to a podcast recently. Malcolm Gladwell has a podcast called Revisionist History. And in one, he was just kind of recounting his personal story growing up. And they grew up, his family grew up near a Mennonite farm, like a Mennonite community. And when you hear Mennonite, think Amish. It's really close. And so one of the things that community does is if someone loses a barn, if the barn falls down or catches on fire or whatever, they lose a barn, or someone new moves in and they haven't built a barn yet, do you know what the community does? They have a barn building. And the whole community gathers around. Everyone brings their tools and they show up and they build a barn in like a day, because everybody is helping. And I love that as a picture of who we are called to be as a people. Now, it looks different for us. Most of us don't have barns that need building right now. But there's a lot of us that have things that need fixing. Those of us who still are waiting for power. And the power of this community is we can show up for one another with whatever the need is, because the truth is we are not in this alone. And that is such a witness, not just to one another, but also to those watching. Because I guarantee you've had neighbors watching. There are people watching what Bamel is doing on Facebook and keeping plugged in. And what they're seeing is a people who love one another well. And that is such a powerful witness. A guy named Rodney Stark did all this research about how the church grew so quickly over the first 400 years of Christianity. It starts with like 12 people and then explodes to become the biggest religion in the Roman Empire. How did that happen in just 400 years? And you know what his answer was? It was people watching the church do exactly what we've been doing this past week. This is a witness to what it looks like when you have received the love of God, and because you've been a good student of that, you know how to love others as well. That, more than anything else, I think, draws people into the beautiful love of Christ. And so I am so thankful for you today, Bamel, for showing up here today, even in the heat. And I'm starting to sweat, so this is about to get cut short. So here we go. Glenda was over there fanning me earlier, keeping me cool, so I was like, I can go a while. But now I'm sweating. No, it's such a beautiful picture. And a witness not only to one another, but to those who are watching too. And so I'm reminded as we close of the words The Gospel of John, Jesus says this to us. A new command I gave you. Love one another, as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, because you love one another. And so the word today, church, is just well done. I think that's the word Christ would have me speak over you today. Well done, because you have lived into this command from the words, the lips of Jesus himself. Love one another. Well done, church.